The NFL is currently experiencing the greatest era of edge play in football history. Every single defensive end in the NFL who produces at a high level is an athletic freak with a high football IQ. These are great players, and it feels a little bit limiting to have to narrow it down to a top 5, but that's what we're going to do today. And just because we leave someone off like Joshua Hines Allen or Trey Hendrickson doesn't mean we think they're a bad player. We just think the 5 or 6 guys we're going to each be talking about are that much better, are that step above, are that level of talent. So starting off, my number 5, a first ballot Hall of Famer, Khalil Mack. And if you just looked at Khalil Mack's pressure rate, you would say, oh, well, had an all right season. How'd he get 17 sacks? It's because Khalil Mack has every single one of his 10 years of experience showing when he rushes the passer. He picks his spots well. He mixes up his moves. He sets things up early in the game and has them pay off when it matters the most. He may be the most technically refined rusher I've got on my list today. Phenomenal talent, still an athletic freak, but a little bit diminished from his days in Oakland or early on in Chicago. Doesn't hold him back at all. Always finds a way to convert the sack when he gets the pressure. Still forces fumbles. Still is an absolute force in the run game. His high football IQ is always on display when he is sniffing out the run, when he's pinching inside or securing the edge to stop a running back from bouncing it outside. He is a phenomenal player. He was in retirement talks before last season. I am so glad he didn't retire. I am glad he's still here, being one of the 5 best defensive ends edges in the NFL currently.
He is a great player. He's a phenomenal player. I'm not going to say anything negative about him, and the only thing that can be construed as negative is that I don't think he's athletically or quite athletically what the guys that have above him on my list are at their points in their respective careers. He is a little bit older, and he said his 17 sacks. How did he reach that number? It did help having a 6-sack game. That certainly helps.
Well, that's how Khalil Mack is. He picks his spots, and he will always have 1 or 2 games a season where he just goes off. This is not his first 6-sack game. Khalil Mack does this. His sacks come in bunches.
I do have one honorable mention before I get to my 5th best edge player in the NFL, and that is Nick Bosa. 49ers fans are going to be probably not too pleased with that placement, but it comes down to the fact his production just wasn't that great last year and what it was the 2 years previously. If you ask me to rank him in the 2 years previously, he's probably 1, 2, or 3 on my list, but only 10.5 sacks last year in a defense that is very productive. He has talent around him. It's not like teams only have to worry about blocking him. He's not a one-man show, and he wasn't all that productive in the games that he played last year. And there's also an argument to be made. He's not even the best player on his own defense, and that title can be awarded to Fred Warner.
Well, I mean, Fred Warner is the best middle linebacker in football, so that's kind of an unfair comparison. You can't really do that with any of the other players on this list. These guys don't have the best safeties on their teams backing them up.
But if we are nitpicking in order to make a top 5, I'm just not putting him on my list this year. But as Isaiah already stated at the beginning of this video, I think it is important to put out there that all these guys are special players and are high-end and can be considered high-end game wreckers for their respective teams.
I'll talk about Nick Bosa later. It's nice to cover your bases and make sure you don't get flamed too hard for leaving somebody off your list. The honorable mention is the coward's way out, but who's your number 5?
I think this is another one that is going to upset people. I have Micah Parsons as the 5th best edge player in the NFL, and people will point to his pass rush win rate last year. How can you have him at 5? He has a 35% pass rush win rate, double teamed 35% of the time, according to ESPN analytics. He had 14.5 sacks. He's an athletic freak from a pass rushing perspective. He can run through offensive tackles. He's too fast for every offensive tackle you go against. But I think when it comes down to it, he disappears in the run game at times when he gets double-teamed and blown off the ball. And from a sack perspective and pass rushing perspective, and you look at where his sacks came from last year, 8 of his 14 sacks last year came from the top 4 most sacked teams in the NFL. And then if you add in the Cardinals and Chargers, who both had top 5 draft picks, that total goes up to 10 sacks. So 10 of his 14 sacks came against against horrible teams, and maybe you're going to make the argument, well, clearly he's a great player. Against bad teams, he takes over and dominates. And I would say yes, but if you're going to be the best, second, or third best edge player in the NFL, you have to dominate against the great teams. So that's why I have him at 5 versus 3, 2, or 1.
Yeah, that's a terrible take, and I don't blame you for it. At least the run game side of things, the sack things, nitpicking, I'll get into that. The run game stuff's a lie, which has been fed to you by enemies of the Cowboys state. I'll talk about Micah Parsons later. At number 4, I've got Maxx Crosby, and I'm going to use some stereotypical sayings here. He is a hard worker. He's the first guy in, last guy out. He is a weight room grinder, and he is a soldier in the film room. Not someone you want your daughter dating. He's not that white, but all those things do ring true about Maxx Crosby. He might have the highest work ethic in the NFL. He never takes plays off, always going 110%, and you can tell based on how he plays, he really studies the film. He knows what offensive tackles are going to do. He knows what moves they are weakest against in the passing game. He can vary his play style so drastically because he practices so hard, and he knows exactly what moves produce the most successful rushes against his current opponent. Very talented, drastic improvement as his career has gone on from a physical standpoint and from a technical standpoint. Great player. I don't think he's that good in the run. I think as a defensive end who's down on the line of scrimmage, he's a little bit light and can get blown off the ball. He's only 250 pounds. He can still generate tackles for losses, but compared to everyone else I've got on the list, Max better in the run. Some of the other guys I'm going to talk about are better in the run. So I think that kind of knocks him a little bit. But phenomenal player, my number 4. That is nitpicking to a high degree.
Well,
saying he's not good
with what you said at the end there, I highly disagree, but he's just one rank higher for me. So I'll address my 4th ranked edge rusher, and then I'll get to him in a second. The 4th best edge player in the NFL I have is Aiden Hutchinson. I think the people that hated on his rookie season, it's time to admit he's a great player. 11.5 sacks last year, the most quarterback hurries in the NFL, playing in front of a secondary that was atrocious. So he didn't exactly have as much time as some of the other players on my list to get to the quarterback because the other quarterback was getting the ball out quickly. The Lions had one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL, not because he couldn't get to the quarterback, but because receivers were always running wide open and they couldn't cover him. So he's great from a run stopping perspective. He had 11.5 sacks and had production as a pass rusher last year. And this year, with a better secondary behind him and a defense that has improved every single year of the Dan Campbell era, I think he's going to take that step and solidify himself as a top 5 edge player in the NFL.
I like the projection. He's not on my list. My issue with Hutch is he's not that deep in terms of his bag. He's got his 2 moves, his bull rush, and his swim move, which he's really good at. Everything else, I think he's marginal from a pass rushing standpoint. People talk about his double team rate allegedly being low. This is why I don't like the stat double team rate in general. You can take a guy who chips a defensive end, a running back who hits him for half a second, peels off, and then goes and runs around. And that qualifies as a double team to some people. Hutch does not get those types of double teams. Hutch gets a guard looking back around for him. Hutch gets a tight end staying in to block him for 2 seconds. He may not have the highest double team rate, but he is double teamed meaningfully a lot. Teams commit players to stop Aiden Hutchinson. And that's why the production's not great. You mentioned the secondary. I agree. I think he's going to be better next year, but I'd like to see the pass rush develop a little bit more before I put him that high up. If it does develop with the pressure rate he's getting with a somewhat unrefined pass rush, dear God, he's going to be one of the 2 best defensive ends in the NFL. It's going to be him and you-know-who at 1.
There's a lot of potential for him to reach that. And now my 3rd best edge defender in the NFL is Maxx Crosby. And these top 3 guys, I think right now there's a gap between them and every other edge defender. You can't block them in the pass game. You can't block them in the run game. You can only send up a prayer in order to stop them. And I think it sounds like quite a bit higher of Maxx Crosby than you do. From a pass rushing perspective, he's gotten better every single year of his career. Had 14.5 sacks last season, was borderline unblockable with not a lot of defensive talent around him to kind of take the attention off of him. And then you kind of spoke a little bit down on his ability to stop the run. He had 14.5 sacks, but also led the NFL in tackles for loss last year. And if you appreciate advanced analytics, I know you often don't, he led the NFL in run block win rate from an edge rushing perspective. Run block win rate according to ESPN analytics. So I think all the indicators there, leading the NFL in tackles for loss, leading the NFL from and amongst edge rushers and run block win rate. So I think he's a special player. I think it's clear why he's 3 and not 2 or 1, but I think there's a gap between the top 3 and the rest.
I think he gets off tackles when it's one-on-one in the run game, but I also think he can pretty easily be knocked off the line of scrimmage by a tight end. If a team decides we are running at Max Crosby and we are going to commit resources to block Max Crosby, I think the other guys on this list are better suited to stand up to those double teams. Maybe not who I've got at number 2. There's room for discussion on that one. But I think the tackle for loss thing in the ESPN run blocking win rate does not take into account the full scope. I'm not saying he's a bad run defender. I'm just not putting him up there with some of the other guys I've got on my list. Like number 3, I've got Nick Bosa, who I think is the best run defender at the edge position in the NFL. Maybe you can make an argument for Myles Garrett, but I think it's Bosa. Phenomenal at stopping the run. Big, physical, powerful player, 270 pounds, sheds blocks effortlessly. Double teams don't affect him. Can get to the running back in the backfield better than almost anyone else. Takes away half the field at times when he's really going. As for the pass rush thing, he was 3rd in pass rush win rate, very high up there in pressures, double teamed a lot yet still generated those pressures, and him having 10.5 sacks, I don't care. You've made fun of people for trashing Hutch for only having 9.5 his rookie year, not being that productive. Sacks don't tell the full story. I've got him above Khalil Mack, who had 7 more sacks than him, because he generates sacks for his teammates. The reason Armstead, Young, those other guys on the 49ers defensive line were so productive is because teams had to key in on stopping Nick Bosa. Nick Bosa generated more sacks than anyone else I have named on this list so far. He may not have individually had them, but he is the cause for the 49ers' successful pass rush. He carries that defensive line. It's why they can put anyone around him on that side of the unit, and they're still going to have an elite front 7 and elite defensive line. Fred Warner helps that too, by all means, but they are always going to be good when they have Nick Bosa there because he raises the floor of that unit, of that defense, and I just can't put him off the list. I just can't. The sacks is the only thing you can really hold against him, and at the end of the day, it doesn't matter.
He's a great player. I'm not going to say otherwise. I think all 6 of the guys that I'm going to talk about today deserve to be paid $30+ million a year compared to the production they offer you on the field. I just prefer the athletic pass rush that Micah Parsons gives you, and I think Aiden Hutchinson and Max Crosby, what we saw from them last season and where I think they're headed is better than what Nick Bosa was last year. Now, it is entirely possible that Nick Bosa could have another Defensive Player of the Year campaign. I'm not writing that off. I would have him at number 6. But this is just how it falls for me right now.
I still think you're vastly underrating him, but we don't need to get into your 49ers hatred.
My second best edge defender in the NFL, and I think 1 and 2, I mentioned there's a gap between my top 3 and the rest. I think there's another gap between 1 and 2 and everyone else.
So you got just Max Crosby hanging out by himself in no man's land, and then you've got Watt and you-know-who up top.
Yes. TJ Watt, he's a phenomenal player, and Steelers fans will say, oh, what? He had a couple interceptions. He had 19 sacks. He's better than anyone else. No one comes close. That guy over in Cleveland, he's a bum. He doesn't even compare to our Lord and Savior, TJ Watt, who we only get so excited about because there's no one on the offensive side of the ball for us to appreciate and kind of look forward to watching every Sunday.
Not a big George Pickens fan, huh?
They'll ride TJ Watt off into the sunset. And yes, he's a great player, great run defender, dynamic in basically every facet, can stop the run. I just think Myles Garrett, who I'm sure we'll both elaborate momentarily, I just think he's a better player, and I have him at 1, but both phenomenal guys.
You're being too nice. I don't have TJ on my list. He'd be an honorable mention if I believed in honorable mentions, but at the end of the day, when I watch the Pittsburgh Steelers play, I only see TJ Watt when he gets a sack. That's it. And hey, I saw him 19 times last year. Good for him. Incredibly productive player. 6th best edge in the NFL. He does not affect the game the same way any of these other players you or I have named do this year. And I'm sorry, it's no slight on him, nothing personal, but if your only saving grace is getting sacks, not even generating pressures consistently, just getting sacks, I can only put you so high up on the list. There's a reason he doesn't have more Defensive Player of the Years. Legitimately, if his current production continues where it's getting sacks, the volume he has, I think he'd have to get a 30-sack season for me to be moved enough to say, yeah, give that guy the Defensive Player of the Year again. The play style just does not feel conducive enough to me to stick him above anyone I'm going to name.
This is generational hate.
At number 2, I've got Micah Parsons. And put plain and simple, Micah Parsons is the best pass rusher in the NFL. He is the best speed rusher we may have ever seen. No one has done it like Micah Parsons before. Running a wide receiver 40 time at the defensive end position is preposterous. This guy claims to be able to beat Tyreek Hill in a sprint. No tackle can adequately block that. Maybe Trent Williams can get his hand on you, but everyone else is struggling to keep up. Phenomenal player. He covers up many of the weaknesses the Cowboys secondary and pass rush has. The reason everyone's got interceptions in that Cowboys second, the reason Trayvon Diggs was an all-pro, they set the record for the most pick sixes in a season, is because Micah Parsons is screaming around the edge, forcing you to either step up into that pocket into another sack or to throw the ball before you'd like to, before you've had time to make a read on the defense and notice the lurking cornerback. It's all because of Micah Parsons. He is the entirety of their pass defense. I cannot overstate enough how much of an impact player he is for that aspect of the defense. As for the run defense, I don't think he's a bad run defender. Maybe I put Max Crosby above him. I certainly don't think he is bad at it, like you seem to insinuate earlier in this clip, or in this podcast.
Compared to his level of a pass rusher.
Well, compared to his level as a pass rusher, yeah, he's the best pass rusher in the NFL. He's not,
and I think
if he was the best run defender in the NFL, he'd be the best player in the NFL, period. But is merely a symptom of the problem, his lack of production in the running game. The linebackers on the Cowboys do not flow well. The defensive tackles on the Cowboys do not get pressure. They do not collapse the backfield at all. They do not make good reads when getting blocked or shed those blocks. And the defensive backs, namely the safeties, do not come screaming up to challenge running backs. They are focused on playing the pass. And when you double team Micah Parsons and you have no one there to help him, you have no one there filling in any of those gaps, no movement from the backers, no push from the D linemen, no motion from the safeties, you're going to look like a bad run defender. I guarantee you the absorption of double teams and his ability to get off those double teams with his speed is being greatly undersold by the ineptitude of what is around him. If you put him on the 49ers, if you put him on the Raiders, you put him anywhere else really, because the Cowboys defense is special in their inability to stop the run, I think he would be I think he'd be perceived as a much better run defender. He's not a bad run defender. I've never liked that label, and I feel like it's a lazy one put on by people just looking for reasons to hate on Micah Parsons, hate on the Cowboys, hate on a phenomenal talent.
Well, I think when people say bad run defender, it's because his pass rushing ability is so elite and it is so high, and other guys that he's kind of regarded as and talked around being in the same tier as, his run defense isn't exactly up to their tier. I mean, he's not as good as Myles Garrett, he's not as good as TJ Watt, and he's not as good as Max Crosby, Aiden Hutchinson, some of these other top 10, top 5 guys when it comes to stopping the run. So I think that's where it comes from. He's obviously not a bad player. I don't think I'd qualify it as a net negative on the Cowboys' run defense. I just don't think he's as well-rounded as the other guys that have above him on this list when it comes to every facet of his game.
And I'd agree with that to a certain extent, but let's not pretend we're not living in the year of our Lord 2024 and the past is not king. If you had to pick something to be good at, a gritty defensive end who gets 5 sacks a year but is just a beast in the run game, and the best run defender in all of football, or Micah Parsons, you're picking Micah Parsons 11 times out of 10.
But there's also the fact a lot of his sacks in production last year were
and the year
calories
before that,
against
it came
teams.
against good teams. I went back and checked these stats because I know we've talked about this in the past. On a year-to-year basis, there is variance, but he has produced at a high level against good teams. Maybe not in the playoffs, but that's really just the Cowboys thing as opposed to a Micah Parsons thing. I would not say, 8 sacks come against the 4 worst teams in the NFL. I would not make that some unique anomaly or some standard thing for him. He was good the year before against good teams. He was good his rookie year against good teams. He's a great pass rusher. He's the best pass rusher. The only person who can challenge him for being the best pass rusher, much like I view as the only person who can challenge Nick Bosa for being the best run defender, is Myles Garrett. And you talk about, these two guys are in a tier by themselves, TJ Watt and Myles Garrett. TJ Watt's not in the same tier as this guy. No one is in the same tier as Myles Garrett. From a physical standpoint, he is as dominant as we have ever seen a defensive end. freakishly powerful, freakishly quick, amazing ability to fight double teams, the best at fighting double teams in the NFL. Better than everyone in recent memory besides Dexter Lawrence, Chris Jones, and Aaron Donald. 3 interior defensive linemen who will be going to the Hall of Fame quite possibly. Maybe not Dexter, but he's that special. Pass game, I don't need to tell you how good he is. You can't block him one-on-one. You can't block him by just chipping him. He is the most important player on the best defense in all of football. That defense without him is average. That defense without him is bad. Myles Garrett hard carries the Cleveland Browns. He is the best defensive end in all of football. He's the best edge in all of football. He's the best defensive player in all of football. I don't think there's much of a conversation.
The only people that will rank Myles Garrett as not the best edge defender in all of football, not the best defensive player in all of football, are Steelers fans or TJ Watt fans. He is phenomenal, and you take a look at what he does, I think he's probably the most physically dominant player I've ever been able to watch, except for Aaron Donald, JJ Watt in his prime. He's able to bull rush offensive tackles. He's able to speed rush offensive tackles. He's able to move inside and Euro step on centers. So the dynamic ability he has to play multiple positions along the defensive line is something that is unique. It's something we've only seen out of a Chris Jones and Aaron Donald among other defenders in the NFL that play currently. And when you compare him to other guys, he's the only person double teamed more than him as an edge defender is Micah Parsons. The only person who had a higher pass rush win rate than him is Micah Parsons, and he carried a Browns defense. Was one of the 3 best defenses in football. The only other defenses that I would put up with them last year were the Ravens and the Chiefs, 2 teams that were in the AFC Championship. And the only reason they were in the AFC Championship is that the Browns had 5 different starting quarterbacks last year, and they haven't been able to supply Myles Garrett with a quarterback that is capable of leading a competent offense. You take a look at what the Browns defense accomplished last season when they at least had competency at quarterback. They went 4-1 with Joe Flacco as a starter and 5-1 with Deshaun Watson as a starter. So he is the best player in football on one of the best defenses in football, and if the Browns just had a good quarterback and could get that position figured out, they'd be contending for Super Bowls.
Not much of a Joe Flacco fan, huh? Somehow you've looped trashing him into our
I said he's competent.
Competent is not very respectful for the Super Bowl MVP, the man who sent Colin Kaepernick into retirement, but I digress. Myles Garrett's really good. He is generational. That title is thrown around way too often. For him, it applies. He is the best defensive player in all of football, and really, we don't have too much else to say.
That has been this week's video. Let us know what you think about Isaiah having TJ Watt out of his top 5. Let us know what you think about Nick Bosa not being in my top 5. How much of a difference is there in between each tier of players? Is there anyone in the Myles Garrett tier? If you're a Steelers fan, let us know how upset you are about your life living in Pittsburgh. That has been the video. Like it, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you in the next one.